Claire Hudson was no ordinary teenager. At just 17, she was already being hailed as the future of American swimming. With piercing blue eyes and a steely discipline rare for her age, Claire had been shattering local and national swim records since she was 12. Her coach, Olympic medalist Jenna Morales, once said Claire had the lungs of a dolphin and the drive of a machine. Reporters from major sports networks had begun calling her the wave whisperer because of her almost supernatural ability to read the tides and currents in open water. Claire's hometown of Seabrook, Oregon, a quiet, mist-covered coastal village, had never seen this much attention. The community rallied around her, hanging banners in the high school gym, hosting fundraisers to support her Olympic training, and naming a lane at the town's only pool after her. Everyone believed she was destined for the 2024 Paris Olympics. She trained 7 days a week, often before sunrise, in freezing waters that most swimmers avoided. Cold never fazed her. Fatigue never slowed her. She swims like she was born in the ocean, her coach once remarked. But despite the praise and success, Claire remained grounded. She wasn't one for parties, social media, or distractions. Her closest companion was her father, Daniel, a retired marine biologist who had raised her alone after her mother passed away when Claire was 5. They shared an unshakable bond, forged through hours spent walking the beach, cataloging shells, and talking about marine life. Claire once told a reporter, "I don't swim for medals. I swim because it makes me feel close to my mom, and closer to something bigger than me." It was this deep connection to the ocean that drove Claire to practice in open water instead of pools. Breakers Point, a jagged stretch of rocky coastline, became her personal arena. It was wild, untamed, and dangerous, prone to sudden fog, shifting tides, and unpredictable weather. But Claire felt safest there. "It listens," she once wrote in her training log, referring to the sea. "It teaches, it tests, and it forgives if you respect it." Most swimmers avoided the area. Claire embraced it like a second home. On the morning of July 16, 2021, just before dawn, Claire arrived at Breakers Point for another open water session. She wore her signature navy blue suit, her favorite goggles, and carried a waterproof watch with a GPS tracker her father insisted she wear. As usual, her coach waited on shore, clipboard in hand. The water was calm but cold, the fog thick but familiar. Claire gave a small wave, adjusted her cap, and waded in, vanishing slowly into the pale, gray mist. That was the last time anyone would see her. The fog that morning was unusually dense, rolling in from the Pacific like a ghostly blanket draped over the coastline. Claire's coach, Jenna Morales, squinted through the mist, straining to keep sight of her star swimmer. Normally, Claire would stay within 300 meters of shore, looping around the natural rock arch and returning to the marker buoy every 15 minutes. But on this morning, something felt off. The ocean was still, almost too still. There were no gulls crying overhead, no wind brushing the surface, just silence, and a slow-moving sheet of white fog swallowing everything in its path. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Jenna checked her stopwatch. No sign of Claire. She called out her name, her voice echoing flatly over the water. No response. She climbed onto the observation rock they often used for vantage, scanning the horizon. The GPS tracker, connected to her tablet, showed no movement, just a blinking dot that suddenly froze, then disappeared. Jenna's stomach dropped. At first, she assumed technical failure. The device had short-circuited before. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. Claire had never broken protocol, never vanished without signaling. Panic rising, Jenna called Daniel Hudson. Within minutes, he arrived at the beach, barefoot and wild-eyed, demanding answers. Emergency services were contacted. By noon, helicopters buzzed overhead. Divers were deployed. Boats circled the surrounding area for hours. The Coast Guard dispatched sonar equipment and underwater drones. But the only thing they found was Claire's navy blue swim cap, tangled in a kelp bed near the cove's outer shelf. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a shark attack or animal interference. Her watch and tracker were never recovered. Authorities officially declared it an accidental drowning. The current may have pulled her out too far. She may have suffered a sudden cramp or a cold water shock. But the explanation didn't sit well with Daniel. He'd studied the waters of Breakers Point for years. There had been no strong tides that day, no recorded swells, and Claire was in peak physical condition, stronger than ever, mentally and physically. Something had happened out there. Something unnatural. And Daniel was determined to find out what. As the sun set that day, the rescue crews began to pack up. Journalists swarmed the shore. Locals lit candles by the pier, mourning the town's brightest star. But Daniel stood at the water's edge, staring into the mist that had stolen his daughter. His fists were clenched, his eyes locked on the horizon. He didn't believe she was gone, not truly. Something had taken her. And deep inside, he could feel it still out there, watching. In the weeks following Claire's disappearance, Daniel Hudson refused to grieve. While others lit candles and held vigils, he pored over tide charts and satellite maps, convinced the truth was buried in the data. Every morning, he returned to Breaker's Point with a pair of binoculars, a drone, and an old spiral notebook, filled with sketches, times, and coordinates. He mapped the shoreline by hand, tracked migratory patterns of seals and fish, and even contacted retired Navy divers to analyze sonar scans from the day Claire vanished. The authorities called it coping. His neighbors called it madness. But Daniel called it something else, a hunt. What unsettled Daniel most was the absence of clues. Claire was a world-class swimmer, and she knew the ocean's moods better than most marine experts. The fact that she left no splash, no scream, no trace beyond a floating cap, made the drowning theory feel lazy, a placeholder for the unexplainable. Daniel began to obsess over the silence that followed her vanishing. No birds, no shifting winds, just an eerie stillness. He replayed the coach's tablet footage again and again, analyzing every second of fog before the signal blinked out. She didn't drown, he muttered one night. She was taken. His once neat scholarly home transformed into a war room. Walls were covered in maps, Polaroids of the shoreline, hand-drawn ocean currents, and newspaper clippings about shipwrecks and disappearances in the area. He interviewed old fishermen who told him stories of people vanishing near the cove as far back as the 1940s. One man, toothless and shaking, said he saw lights under the water there once, not from boats, not from anything human. Daniel didn't dismiss it. Instead, he started recording audio at night near the rocks. Once, he captured something, a low, rhythmic humming, like a voice vibrating beneath the waves. His obsession cost him everything. He quit his teaching job at the university, sold most of his belongings to fund underwater surveys, and withdrew from family and friends. The town pitied him at first, then grew wary of his presence. Children whispered that Claire's dad had gone crazy. But Daniel didn't care. His world had narrowed to one single goal: finding out what really happened to his daughter. Each piece of data, every unexplained shadow in the sonar, brought him closer to an answer he could feel in his bones. Claire was still out there, somehow, somewhere, and yet, despite his determination, the ocean remained mute. For nearly 4 years, Daniel combed the coastline with a quiet, simmering desperation. On rainy days, he would sit alone on the lifeguard tower, staring into the gray surf like he was waiting for something or someone to rise from it. And then, on a seemingly ordinary morning in mid-July, for years to the day since Claire vanished, something did appear. Something so strange, so impossibly specific, that it reignited his obsession with terrifying intensity. It was a stormy afternoon, in late September, when Daniel finally worked up the courage to enter Claire's room again. He hadn't touched it in years, not since she vanished. Everything was exactly as she had left it, the scent of lavender still faint on her pillow, a faded Olympic poster above the bed, and a stack of textbooks half buried under her swim gear. But something felt different now. After 4 long years of searching the sea, Daniel found himself wondering if the answers he'd been chasing were never out in the water, but locked away inside this room all along. As he sifted through drawers and boxes, Daniel's fingers brushed against something wedged behind Claire's bookshelf. It was a small waterproof case, about the size of a lunchbox, wrapped in a towel and secured with a latch. Inside, protected by layers of plastic and cloth, was a deep blue leather journal. Its cover was worn at the edges, and a small silver charm dangled from the spine-hurt mother's old pendant, the one Claire always wore before switching to a swimmer's chain. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened it. The first few pages were filled with Claire's neat handwriting, workout logs, ocean temperature notes, diet plans. But as he turned the pages, the entries became more personal, more troubling. About 2 months before her disappearance, Claire had started documenting strange occurrences during her solo swims. She mentioned hearing low, melodic sounds underwater, too rhythmic to be whale songs, too clear to be just. Described seeing a shadow beneath her, moving against the tide, following her silently for several minutes before disappearing. Another entry described the feeling of being watched from the rocks, even though the beach had been empty. She began referring to the figure simply as him. Claire never described his face, only that he appeared during misty mornings and always stood in the same spot, near the cliff's edge, just above the tide line. One of the most disturbing entries came exactly 1 week before she vanished. Claire wrote that she had begun dreaming of the ocean, of sinking slowly into dark waters where voices whispered her name from below. She said it felt like someone or something was calling her into the deep. "It's not fear," she wrote. "It's invitation." The final entry was dated the day before her last swim. It read, "If I go tomorrow, I want it to be on my terms, not theirs. The ocean has been watching me. I think I finally understand what it wants." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the words, feeling like the floor had dropped out beneath him. Who were they? What was the ocean asking of her? And why had she never told him about any of this? He read the journal over and over for hours, the storm outside howling like some unseen voice echoing her warnings. That night, Daniel realized he hadn't been chasing shadows in the sea, he had been following her path, retracing breadcrumbs she had left behind. The question now was whether he was too late, or just about to uncover something no one was ever meant to find. After reading Claire's journal cover to cover, Daniel couldn't sleep. One name kept echoing in his mind, him. But who was he? Or what was he? Desperate for answers, Daniel began searching beyond science. He turned to folklore, scanning old local archives and maritime records for anything that matched the strange behavior Claire had described. In the town's neglected historical society basement, he uncovered a dusty box of handwritten logs, personal accounts, and forgotten local legends. One story, buried in a yellowed diary from 1883, sent chills down his spine. It was titled The Drowned Woman of Breakers Point. According to the tale, in the late 1800s, a woman named Eliza Harrow drowned under mysterious circumstances near the same stretch of coast Claire had trained in. Eliza had been known for wandering the cliffs, speaking of dreams that called her into the sea. Townspeople claimed she was touched by something beneath the waves. The night she vanished, witnesses said she walked calmly into the ocean, without struggle, never resurfacing. A week later, fishermen found her locket washed ashore, wrapped in seaweed, just like Claire's cap had been. Rumors swirled for generations that Eliza hadn't drowned, but had been taken. Over the next 100 years, similar stories emerged quietly, and usually ignored. A boy in 1921 who vanished after chasing a figure into the fog. A lighthouse keeper in 1956 who went missing during low tide. His journal, filled with ramblings about voices singing through the rocks. A surfer in 1978 who disappeared on a calm day. His board was found snapped in half with no signs of a struggle. Each time the pattern was the same. Silence, fog, vanishing, and something left behind. The more Daniel read, the more convinced he became that Breakers Point wasn't just dangerous, it was haunted. Locals had whispered for decades about the siren of Breakers Point, a womanly figure said to emerge in the fog, calling people to the water with a voice only some could hear. Most dismissed it as myth, campfire fodder, to scare kids away from the cliffs. But Claire had written about hearing whispers, seeing a figure, feeling pulled. It matched too closely to ignore. Daniel cross-referenced the dates of disappearances with tidal patterns, fog density records, and lunar phases. A strange pattern emerged. Every major vanishing had occurred within a narrow 4-day window surrounding mid-July, the exact time Claire had vanished. More disturbing still, Daniel noticed something else. In the margins of Claire's journal were doodles barely noticeably of a female face, pale eyes closed, hair drifting like seaweed. One sketch was captioned, "She's not alone down there." The face appeared again and again, drawn with increasing urgency. Daniel began to wonder if Claire had seen her to Eliza, not as a ghost, but as something changed, something still tethered to the sea. His daughter hadn't just documented hallucinations, she had left behind a breadcrumb trail of warnings. And Daniel, for the first time, began to consider the terrifying possibility. Claire hadn't drowned. She had joined something. It was the early morning of July 16th, exactly 4 years to the day since Claire vanished when Daniel returned to Breakers Point. He hadn't planned to. In fact, he had avoided the area for nearly 6 months after the legend of the drowned woman left him shaken and uncertain. But something in him stirred that day, like an invisible thread tugging at his chest. He arrived just after dawn, as the mist rolled in, ghosting the cliffs in that same silver haze he remembered from the day she disappeared. The air was strangely still. Not a bird in the sky. Not a ripple on the surface. It felt like time had folded in on itself. Daniel wandered along the beach, half in a trance, eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't expecting to find anything. He never really was anymore. But just as he reached the far edge of the cove, something caught his eye. A rusted, sea-drifted buoy had washed ashore. It wasn't from the local harbor. In fact, it looked like it had been out in the water for years. Attached to it was a length of barnacle-covered rope, tangled with seaweed, and dangling from that rope was a small, sealed plastic container. His hands shook as he pried it open. Inside was something he hadn't seen in 4 years, Claire's silver chain, the one she had worn in every race, gifted by her mother. Wrapped around it was a strip of waxed paper, curled from the damp but still legible. Written in smudged ink, familiar, yet slightly altered, was a chilling message. Not drowned, not dead, just waiting to be found. Daniel dropped to his knees, staring at the words. His breath caught in his throat. The handwriting was hers. But it was subtly wrong. Just enough to feel off, like someone had learned to copy it, or like Claire had written it under duress. Or worse, under transformation. There was more. On the back of the note was a crudely drawn map, marked with jagged lines and symbols he didn't recognize. But the geography was unmistakable. It led straight to the cliffside north of Breaker's Point. More specifically, it ended near an old tide cave system that was long believed to be collapsed and inaccessible. The cave had always been shrouded in stories of shipwrecks, old smuggler tunnels, and sea creatures with no name. But Daniel had never taken the rumors seriously until now. The path she had drawn could only be followed during extreme low tide, and that tide was coming in just 36 hours. Daniel clutched the necklace in his palm and looked out at the sea. The fog was thicker now, hugging the rocks like fingers. Was it a sign she was alive? Was this message a breadcrumb left by someone trying to escape, or a trap left by something using her memory? His instincts were screaming both possibilities at once. One thing was certain. Someone, or something, wanted him to find that buoy. And whatever he decided to do next would either bring him one step closer to the truth or plunge him into the same silence that swallowed Claire 4 years ago. The map had haunted Daniel for 2 nights straight. He barely slept, spending hours cross-referencing tide tables, satellite images, and geological surveys. The cave system marked in Claire's message had once been explored in the 1960s before a series of collapses rendered it off-limits. It was said to stretch deep beneath the cliffside, with pockets of air trapped inside, like ancient lungs beneath the stone. Locals had called it the Siren's Mouth, but few remembered why. Daniel packed light, just a flashlight, a waterproof satchel, Claire's journal, and the necklace. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. He just knew he had to go. He arrived at the cliffside 30 minutes before the lowest tide. The rocks were slick, jagged, and sharp enough to draw blood if you weren't careful. Daniel descended carefully into the ravine marked on the map, his heart thudding louder than the distant crash of waves. At the mouth of the cave, he hesitated. The air was cold, not in temperature but in presence, like walking into a place that wasn't meant for the living. Salt stung his eyes, and the air buzzed faintly, almost imperceptibly. It was a sound he recognized, though he hadn't heard it in years. The same low, humming vibration from his ocean recordings. It was coming from inside the cave. The narrow entrance opened into a passage just tall enough for him to stand. Water pooled around his feet as he walked deeper into the darkness, guided only by the fading beam of his flashlight. The deeper he went, the stranger things became. The walls glistened not with water, but with something else. Translucent, jelly-like, pulsing faintly with light. The humming grew louder, almost like a voice now, layered and harmonic. As Daniel moved forward, he spotted something wedged in the rocks ahead. A second container, smaller, older, wrapped in cloth. Inside was a torn scrap of notebook paper, water-stained and delicate. The ink was smudged, but the message was clear. She sees you, don't follow the singing. Daniel's blood ran cold. He turned off his flashlight for just a second, and instantly regretted it. The cave lit up in faint bioluminescent pulses, glowing veins running across the walls like living circuitry. He suddenly felt watched. Not by a person, but by the space itself. By the darkness. The singing or humming grew louder, surrounding him, echoing off the rock in impossible ways, and then he heard something else. A whisper, not inside the cave, but inside his mind. It wasn't Claire's voice, but it carried the shape of her tone. A wordless plea, or maybe a warning. The line between the two was blurring fast. Then he saw it, etched into the stone at the end of the tunnel, just before the cave plunged into pitch-black water, were 6 carved letters. Faint, but unmistakable. Claire. Below it, a single arrow pointed downward into the submerged cavern. No footprints, no air bubbles. Just cold, still water that looked like glass. Daniel stood frozen, heart pounding in his throat. Had she been here? Had she carved her name with her own hands, or had someone, or something else, done it for her? One final clue left him standing at the edge, staring into the black unknown, knowing that whatever was down there wasn't meant to be found.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.